Hello. All right. Get your names down. So we're doing the early Cold
What's up?
War. Um, yeah, my goodness, there are some really good, uh, like a PBS, really good documentaries on the early Cold War that I would highly recommend. Um, just again, like World War II, a fascinating topic. Um, do either of you have any questions before we begin? Perusing the assignment.
Yeah, are you able to hear me there?
I can, Kevin. Uh huh.
Right, I know maybe it's a little bit noisy, but first of all, how's it going?
I'm sorry, Kevin. I heard you well when you asked if we could hear you, and then after that, it kind of petered out.
Able to hear me now?
Yeah, your voice it like projects. It's going like e.
How about now? Able to hear me now there?
Yes, that's better.
About that. But how's it going?
Going well. Going all right. All right. How about you?
Uh, I just wanted to good, not too bad. Just driving home, but I just wanted to ask. I messaged you. I'm sorry, it's a little bit non-related to today, but I kind of fell behind on last week's assignment, and I was wondering if whether I'm able to turn in the late assignment last week.
Of course. Of course.
Okay, thank you.
No, no problem. No problem, Kevin. And I will sometime this evening. I'll try to return your written message. Okay,
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
no problem. So I feel like I'm very self-explanatory on the sections with the titles. So the first one, right, just trying to set the stage that with the Soviet Union as well as with the United States, that they were a bit ideologically incompatible, right? Uh, with Marxism versus capitalism. Remember that Marxism believes that capitalism is one of the final stages of existence of the plutocracy, the rule by the wealthy, and which is very parasitical, very unhealthy, very inequitable, and it needs to be demolished and will be. They believe, right, from the writings of Karl Marx and Engels, and so when they looked at America, they saw greed. They saw a plutocratic government ruled by selfishness and greed. Everyone chasing after the American dream, but the system is rigged for the wealthy. The system is run by the wealthy, as is the government. All right. And it didn't make matters any better with the information found on section number 2, right? Uh, then with the United States, when they looked at the Soviet Union, they saw the worst that the Soviet Union had to offer, right? When you look at as far as the autocratic rule of the sorry, let's see here, the autocratic rule of one man in the person of Joseph Stalin, and and forced conformity. Remember, Marxism presses for equality of condition to put everyone, to create, theoretically a classless society. And capitalism advocates merely equality of opportunity. And we believe that in our political tradition, that capitalism is not something necessarily worthy of praise morally in and of itself, right? Because you are encouraging people and allowing people to selfishly pursue their own interest. You have some people playing basketball on a hot day, and they're playing basketball, and another person says, you know what? I think I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to buy a Gatorade for $1.39, and I'm going to go to the basketball players over there because they look sweaty and thirsty, and so that they don't have to stop, get on their bikes or get in their cars and drive a few miles to the nearest convenience store, I'm going to offer them Gatorades for $2 a piece. Well, theoretically, right, that person offering the Gatorade does not have the best interest of the basketball players in mind. He's thinking of himself and his own enrichment, but that the basketball players are going to get what they want from it, and buying a $2, the convenience of getting a drink immediately. And he's going to get what he wants and getting profit off of each Gatorade that he sells to them. And so, in and of itself, morally, even the founding fathers and others, they didn't necessarily praise the selfishness that's a part of the capitalist system that's encouraged and permitted. But what they contend, right, is that it's in line with human nature, that is the nature of man. And, it's a case for them thinking that Marxism, whether it be communism or socialism, et cetera, in different forms, is not congruent with human nature. You could take a look at the Kulak farmers, right? With the Kulak farmers, they were told what and how much to farm, and they were told that they would be given, no matter how hard they worked, no matter how much wheat that they yielded in their harvest, they would get according to need. Oftentimes it was by the number of children, how much land they were on, etc. And so hence they felt like there was no incentive to work hard in the Ukraine and elsewhere, these Kulak farmers. And so they said some of them stopped working so hard, etc. And of course, he punished them accordingly. And you think about, two siblings that are told to mow the lawn and do the dishes, and they would get paid for it by mom and dad when mom and dad return. And one sibling does all the work, and they both are given $20 a piece. And the sibling that did all the work feels like that is, quote, unfair. So we feel like with human nature being what it is in Western civilization, that has been fed by the church in adherence to the age-old belief in the fallen nature of man, right? Original sin, that people are inherently sinful, they're inherently selfish, and that capitalism, it concedes to that, and that there's no use in trying to fight against that natural impulse. And so, but of course, to the leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, like Lenin, right? Lenin thought that could be undone. In the whole nature versus nurture argument, he felt like that it was nurture that encouraged Americans to be selfish capitalists, and that what can be learned can be unlearned, especially amongst children. And so he was for, what we would call indoctrinating the children and teaching them to cooperate and share, and not think in terms of what is fair or what is not fair based upon the line of meritocracy, right? Of you get what you work for, but instead to each according to need, right? In communism. And so there's a big ideological divide between the two of us. And I wanted to articulate that right off the bat with this assignment, right? And by the way, I would call subjectively, I would explain the Cold War generically as a time of geopolitical competition and diplomatic and military tension and competition between the United States and the Soviet Union of Russia. All right. And so it was alive and well not long after World War II. Remember, we were kind of strange bedfellows fighting against the same enemy. But before that, Stalin had signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany and had divided, the Scandinavian countries and Poland with the Germans until the Germans betrayed them and invaded Russia. And so we were awkward allies, to say the least. So culpability for this Cold War tension, I'm playing the blame game here, right, on the next two numbers. And so for one, this is revisionist history, and it's contending that the U.S. is largely to blame for the Cold War tension of the late 1940s and 1950s. And so, when the Bolsheviks had a revolution and then had a civil war with the Mensheviks, the white shirts, we sent 12,000 soldiers into Russia And how was that our business? They were sent to Vladivostok and ostensibly to protect American-owned railroads, but it looked as if we were meddling into their civil war. Also, during the war, we were not as faithful of an ally, arguably, as to the Russians as we were to the British. You look at the Lend-Lease Act, we gave the lion's share of resources to Britain rather than to Russia. And Russia was in desperate need of it. But instead, we gave most of it to England. When they met at Casablanca and they met out in the Atlantic with the Atlantic Charter, it was always FDR and Churchill buddying up with each other and not even inviting, much less including Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. And so at any rate, the Ultra program from Bletchley Park in England, we were able to crack the Nazi codes. The Russians could have definitely benefited from that. And we didn't share that information with them. They could have greatly used that because they had over 20 million casualties in World War II. That's just a staggering number, over 20 million casualties. And we could have done more, ostensibly, to help Russia as our ally. Then they asked us to open up a Western Front, and opening up that Western Front, we arguably dragged our feet. We fought in Italy for a couple years. He was asking us, in early 42, to help him by opening up a Western battle line in France. And we waited until June 6, 1944 to do so. So he felt like we wanted the Germans and the Soviet Union to battle it out in a war of attrition, to beat the heck out of each other so that the U.S. could be the stronger team standing at the end of the war. So that exacerbated the personality that was already depicted as a very paranoid personality in the person of the premier of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin. Then with number 3, it blames the Russians, right? And so look at their imperialism at the end of World War II. So for instance, you look at all these countries right here. As they came in and, quote, liberated these countries, right? They're going to put puppet governments and leave their military T-34 tanks in these countries. Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, the Balkan countries, Yugoslavia, etc., right? Romania, Bulgaria. And they even went down into Turkey and Greece, Russian soldiers. And so at Yalta, supposedly, Joseph Stalin promised the American president that he was going to allow free and fair elections in these liberated countries. And he did not do so. It didn't happen. He never made good on that promise. And so, that exacerbated tension. And then in, his purges made him look terrible. He had some infamous purges where he took out over 50% of his military officers out of his paranoia with these purges, right? And let's see here. Then you have the entrance of Harry Truman. Harry Truman comes in and begins demanding, right, at Potsdam conference, begins demanding that those free and fair elections take place. He's no longer just kind of letting it slide like his predecessor FDR did before FDR died as the previous president. He takes a stand. When Germany invaded and made it to Berlin, and they decided to split Berlin in half at the end of the war, with the allies of the United States, France, and England controlling the western side of Germany, and Russia, the Soviet Union, controlling the eastern side of Germany. He insisted that Berlin, even though it was in the eastern sphere claimed by the Soviet Union, that the Berlin be shared as a significant city in and of itself. And so he pressed on to that and won a concession from Stalin and having Berlin, even though it was in Russian occupied territory, split in half, east and west. Of course, the United States controlling the west, the western side of the city. And so he comes in, right? And he's almost depicted as having a little bit of a little man's complex. He was not going to allow Stalin to bully him, right? And so he made a separate currency for those in West Berlin, and that really kind of provoked Stalin. He engaged in the famous Marshall Plan, and the Marshall Plan was to give $13 billion to war-torn European countries with strings attached, but $13 billion to rebuild their economies. And so he's coming in and trying to ensure that they're going to stay capitalist. And then, of course, in Korea, he issued he stood up to the call by Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill in Fulton, Missouri, gave a college address and said that every generation has a bully. And the previous generation had seen fascism as the bully. But he says no sooner had the fascist enemy been vanquished than a new enemy, a new bully, suddenly appeared in the form of the Soviet Union. And he says that Iron Curtain has descended upon those countries that I just showed on the map in Eastern and Central Europe. And he said, Providence has ensured that the United States become the next protector of the world against the bully because of her standing militarily and economically on top, arguably, in the world, being the most powerful country. And so Truman had the personality to embrace that Iron Curtain speech and declare the Truman Doctrine. And with the Truman Doctrine, he stated, right, that he was going to contain Soviet aggression. He was going to make sure anywhere and everywhere where a peaceful majority was threatened by an armed minority or by an outside country to forcefully impose communism upon them, that the United States, as the world's policeman, would come in and defend that peaceful majority. And he called it out anywhere in the world. And this Truman Doctrine is going to get us involved in the Korean War, and also from 50 to 53, and in Vietnam. You know, in heat, Vietnam turned up in heat by 67, and for sure by 69, and we didn't leave until the mid to late 70s. So at any rate, the UN had encouraged a partition of present Korea at the 38th parallel between a North and a South Korea. And Kim Il-sung decided to violate that and invade the 38th parallel border and forcefully push South Korea into the orbit of communism. And so Truman felt as if he'd already put his line in the sand and he couldn't go back now. And so we, as well as 16 countries from the UN, got involved in fighting North Korea to save South Korea from the forceful imposition of communism. And then you also have the famous Berlin airlift. And with the Berlin airlift, it started with a group of college students in Eastern Berlin using the newly available radio technology and putting out a call saying that they wanted, they had a list of several things that they were demanding from the Soviet Union and several freedoms that they were demanding. And the Soviet Union cracked down on them to punish them and blockaded Berlin from the Allies, but while we had already claimed Western Berlin, right? And so we sent bombers with food, coal, blankets, candy, all kinds of resources. We flew them into Berlin to help the people of Berlin, and it was a success as far as public image. It made Truman's administration look really good. What did not make Truman's administration look good was the quote loss of China. Chiang Kai-shek was our ally, and he's depicted in the books a bit as an ugly ally, who was rather autocratic, rather his government rather oligarchic, ruled by the rich, not allowing many opportunities or freedoms to the people, but claiming that he was pro-West, pro-US, and anti-communism was enough to ensure our alliance with him. And then you had Mao Zedong. And Mao Zedong, they had gone on the famous march, humiliating march, had undergone many deprivations, had fought bravely against the Japanese during World War II. And by 49, they're going to win the Civil War and make China communist. And the Republican Party is going to bash Truman and the Democrats for being too soft on communism and not engaging in containment. And containment was largely the brainchild of a guy named George S. Kennan, Kennan. And Kennan was a sub-ambassador to the Soviet Union. And Stalin gave a famous speech to his Politburo where he told them that they need to become economically and militarily prepared for the inevitable wars against the capitalist countries. Because ultimately, right, with Marxism, their goal is to have a global revolution, have the entire world become communist. And they had established the Comintern, and the Comintern was the Soviet Internationale. It was an organization that set up offices in Detroit, Chicago, New York City, and other American cities, where they literally were trying to foment or spread a Bolshevik communist revolution here in the U.S. And they infiltrated through espionage. And the famous PBS video documentary that I highly recommend you watch, this Russian ex-spy kind of arrogantly grins and said, we had access to everything. And it is amazing the organizations that the Soviet Union infiltrated via espionage with spies. It's quite humbling. And you look at cases like the Chevalier case, Chevalier, and the Rosenberg case, both pertain to Soviet espionage with our Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where we were making the atomic weapons, right? The Soviets had spies and were getting information from our scientists on how to make a nuclear weapon. And this scared the heck out of the American public. And the Republican Party, under young leaders like Richard Nixon, ran with this and said, see, the Democrats, they call it red baiting. The Democrats are not doing their job. They're not going to be content until we're destroyed by the Soviet Union. They need to be stronger in containing. But going back to Kennan, when Stalin had made that speech, he gave his famous telegram, the long telegram or the Kennan note. And the Kennan telegram advised that we better become ready for World War III against the Soviet Union, that they were building up their army and technology and economy for a war ultimately against the United States. So we fought in proxy, right? In Vietnam and in Korea, we didn't fight the Soviet Union per se directly, but we fought governments that were funded and armed by the Soviet Union and encouraged by the Soviet Union to spread communism across the border. All right. And so that's a cute kid, Kevin. Let's see here.
Thanks. So I don't mean to distract you guys, just that I'm babysitting and he wants to sit with me.
Not at all. No, not at all. That's part of the junior college experience, right?
I guess so.
That's right. And so then with number 4, I turn around and say, on the one hand, with number 3, we contend that Truman was just the man for the job. he wanted to, he had the backbone that evidently FDR did not have, to take stands against the spreading of communism, right? With his Truman Doctrine, his Berlin Airlift, and the Korean War, etc. But others contend that he went too far, that he saw things in a Manichaean way. Instead of seeing the complexity of things, he just simply saw good versus evil in everything that he did in rather simplistic fashion. And he may have actually provoked Stalin more than he deterred him. Because remember, deterrence, right? That's the proverbial question to this day. To what extent do you try to win over someone with whom you have tension, right? With goodwill? And to what extent do you simply try to scare or deter that person from messing with you, right? So hence, beware of dog, sign that says owner owns a gun on a house, right? To what extent do you pull that? Do you go that avenue and pull that kind of MO to keep your family safe? And to what extent do you travel to your neighbors' houses and give them brownies and a dish for dinner and welcome them and introduce yourself, etc., right? And of course, you could try to do a balance of the two. And some presidents contended to do just that, like Eisenhower in the 1950s. But at any rate, we tried to, under Truman, there's evidence that he felt a lot of pressure from young Republicans like Richard Nixon to become tougher against communism, and that it may have caused more trouble than it prevented. This kind of deterrence policy of making Russia afraid of messing with us. For instance, his monetary policy in Berlin kind of provoked the distrust of Stalin, right? His formation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is a contingency alliance, right? No different in some ways than the contingency alliances that helped arguably bring about World War I, telling countries, right, if and should we fight the Soviet Union, we offer you this, this, and this in return for you supporting us and becoming our ally in that hypothetical war. So that's how NATO came about. It wasn't simply just a military arm of the UN, as it seems to be now. It was a military contingency alliance against the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union responded in establishing the Warsaw Pact from Warsaw, Poland, right? With Romania, Bulgaria, and the Balkan countries, and Poland, etc. And granted, he forced them to join the Warsaw Pact. There was no question, there was no choice involved. But now he has his own military alliance as a contingency alliance against us. So is Truman causing more trouble and more tension than he is preventing it? At Potsdam, he bragged about our new weapon, the atomic weapons. And he even has a quote where he said that basically the nuclear weapons being dropped on Japan will make the Soviet Union more diplomatically conciliatory in the future, that it's going to scare them, that we could end up using it on them next. And so, he kind of used that heavy hand in his approach. He gave the okay for the formation of the CIA. And with the CIA, right, there was a particular document okayed by the National Security Council, and that's of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of Defense, and one other Secretary of the Cabinet. I can't recall right off the bat. But at any rate, they gave their okay to the CIA in the directive known as 10/2. 10/2. If you wanted to look further into that. That was the okay for the CIA to engage in espionage and also in insurgency plans, right? And remember, with insurgency, you're trying to overthrow an established government, right? And so we gave the green light and embraced within the CIA ex-Gestapo members of Nazi Germany, Hungarian terrorists, according to this book here, Legacy of Ashes, A History of the CIA. And not to mention in Latin America, we gave the tacit approval to some very hardcore right-wing dictatorships beneath us in Latin America, because the argument was, right, is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so there was a guy named Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, and he was awful toward his own people and toward any of those who chose to oppose him. And later on in the 70s, Richard Nixon has a famous quote about Trujillo. He said, yes, he's a son of a bitch, but at least he's our son of a bitch. And that's a direct quote. And so, you know, that happened, whereby we allowed and gave the okay in Latin America to some very inequitable governments, some very ruthless governments. Look up the Somoza family of Nicaragua and how they ruled that country. Look up a guy named Ubico, just some, and as well as Trujillo, some very harsh dictatorships that we supported, right? Simply because they were anti-communist. But then in Central and Eastern European countries, like in Hungary and Romania, etc., we, like I said, we sent ex-Gestapo, ex-fascist Nazi Germans and terrorist groups. We gave the okay to try to overthrow the communist regimes in those countries. We manipulated elections. Look at the 1948 parliamentary elections in Italy. We utilized the Catholic Church, and they went on a program with the Catholic Church, and we paid them to do this, by the way, whereby they told their good Catholic Italian parishioners, you have to choose between Jesus Christ and the Communist Party. Because remember, with the communist, with the Bolshevik Revolution, they were very anti-religion and anti-theistic. They were even ideologically against the notion of a God. And they weren't even agnostic. They were atheistic. They were very anti-religion, anti-Christianity, etc. Look at the way they treated the Orthodox clergy in Russia. It was not good.
I have a question there.
Yes.
So, what's the main difference between socialism and communism?
With me, gosh, you know what? The forms of socialism that I have seen, I define generically as diet communism. They still allow the private sector to exist. They still allow private property to exist, private transactions to occur, right? Of buying and selling. But they establish certain basic fields like electricity and water, education, medical care, right? And other types of services and goods. And they determine that those constitute a need, not merely a product or a privilege, right, as in a capitalist country, but a need, a right that all people in their country are entitled to. So then the government controls those services and goods, and it tries to allocate it to people according to their need rather than according to merit. In a communist country, from what I understand, you know, ultimately on the writings of Karl Marx, communism was to become was supposed to relinquish all government, and kind of like a John Lennon song, right? What's that song John Lennon sang? Imagine, just everyone everywhere sharing everything, no need of government, no need of any coercive institutions like police. It's very utopian, right? Of creating a heaven on earth. But before that, right, it calls for the dictatorship of the proletariat. It calls for the proletariat, the working class, to virtually have a dictatorship over the country and to begin moving it in the directions in which it needs to go. And it's supposed to be a temporary measure, but it's still, that phase of communism is what the United States associated with the Soviet Union, right? And with communism, there's no private property. There are no, it's all according to need. It brings about complete equality of condition. And so it's more, I hate to use it just in a negative way as a typical American, but it's more extreme than socialism.
And
from what I understand.
In a communist country, does everybody get paid the same?
Yes. Well, no, they're according to need, basically according to the size of your family.
Oh, the size of your family. So it's not, so you can be a doctor and get paid less than a mechanic if your family's smaller than theirs?
That's right. Theoretically, on paper. Yes. Right. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so, and I hope I didn't inform anybody on anything with that, because it's been a long time since I've studied the works of Marxism and delineated between socialism and communism, et cetera, et cetera. So at any rate, Truman gets this pressure and he gives the okay. So the CIA, they're going to overthrow people. There's a guy named Jacobo Arbenz Guzman. It usually goes by his second name, Arbenz, Arbenz. Jacobo Arbenz Guzman engaged in a land redistribution policy in Latin America. I think it was Guatemala. And the CIA established what they called the duck test. If they look like a duck, if they quack like a duck, it doesn't matter if they admit to being a duck, they're a duck, right? And so hence, if it looks like a communist law and it smells of a communist law, then it's a communist law. And so Arbenz was overthrown by our CIA. And that's not the only time we did it. We did it with a guy named Salvador Allende as well, Allende, in Chile, was it? So at any rate, for the same reason, for not passing the duck test down in Latin America and wanting to redistribute property. And also what made it look terrible during the 1950s is these right-wing dictators were granting lots of money to these corporations like United Fruit Company and Standard Oil. And then what do you know? You have guys with a conflict of interest like the Dulles brothers, Alan Dulles of the CIA, John Foster Dulles of the Defense Department, and they own stock in Standard Fruit, and Standard Fruit was having its lands that it wasn't cultivating confiscated by Arbenz, and they ordered that Arbenz be overthrown, and of course that helped them financially, and so it just looks bad. Again, if you wanted to look at a source of American Cold War policy being rather depicted as unjust in Latin America in its anti-communist bent, look at Walter Lefebvre. L-E, is it L-E? Is it the French law or is it the Spanish law? It's L-E or L-A, and then a separate word, F-E-B-E-R. He's got several books on this topic that are very interesting. And so,
sorry. No. I just hate to go back to the topic real quick, but so in a communist country, do they have universal like healthcare and stuff, or is that they do?
Yes, they do.
So they do believe in the right to as a necessity for those things.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so they do provide those things for their people.
They do, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so you see, like with all this espionage and so forth, and then it becomes even more heated, this Cold War atmosphere, when it gets to the 50s and you have the Red Scare, right? And I think I'm going to wait on the Red Scare when we do the Cold War Part 2, okay? When we do the Cold War Part 2.
I have a question.
Yes.
So with communism, when they have like standardized healthcare, standardized such and such, wouldn't that mean that since everybody has it, they would have to wait longer on healthcare, like getting treated like with more wait times and having to like just like everything's split apart equally. So it'd take more time to do things. Like someone who needs a surgery would like bleed to death if they didn't get it done right away, but they would have to wait because they have to wait for other people, kind of thing like that.
Yeah, when you look at the gas and water socialism of Canada, that's exactly what you hear stories about, right? And the joke is, right, it's like with communism is you have the DMV running everything. And you know what it's like going to the DMV. So yeah, that's a very popular and valid claim, Jaden, by conservatives to this day against socialized medicine.
I think that's super interesting. I didn't think about that perspective of things, but I guess it also like, I mean, I guess waiting longer is better than not having access to something, though, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, you could make that argument that waiting longer is better than not having access to it.
Because some people don't have access, or can't afford certain procedures or medical treatment or whatever the necessities are to them. Some people in the capitalistic country can't afford those things, so they can't even get in line per se.
Yeah, and thank goodness for the HIPAA laws, right, regarding like public hospitals and their ERs, that they regardless of financial ability, they thank goodness they have to tend to them at the hospitals. But yeah, for any further type of coverage, medication, etc., you have to afford to be covered in a capitalist economy. And that's one more example of communists, or those on the left in our political spectrum today, right? Contending that capitalism is too cold, having everything based ostensibly on merit. That there needs to be a little bit more of a movement to the left to ensure that all people have access to medical treatment. It's a very interesting, intriguing discourse. Medical care alone.
I'm not trying to choose any side specifically. I just try to see both perspectives of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what I always try to encourage you guys to do. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So what I want to do, I want to go to the early Cold War test questions and ask if you have any questions on these questions. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them yet.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So on number 5, I'd like to understand a little bit more about what brinkmanship means.
Okay, good. Brinkmanship, right, is when you count upon your present advantage in military technology and power to try to bully concessions from your enemies, right? By threatening to go to war with them if they don't comply with your wishes. That'd be an example of brinkmanship. All right. Yeah, absolutely. So notice with number 5, right, is I contended the opposite, right? Is that on the political spectrum in the late 40s and in the 1950s, it didn't stay that way. But at the time of Truman, the Republicans were the ones who arguably were for something closer to brinkmanship, right, and deterrence against the threat and spread of communism. And they accused the Democratic Party for being too soft against communism and not adhering to the Truman Doctrine effectively. Especially, right, when Truman's administration was blamed for, quote, losing China, as if it was our fault, the Democratic Party's fault, more specifically, for China becoming a communist country. So yeah, that's what I meant, Jaden, by brinkmanship.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, as always. All right. Anybody else?
I have one more question.
Sure.
So will number 7 be covered more in the notes?
It should be. It should be found in the notes on that the section of Harry Truman being just the man for the job. Court history of Harry Truman in that section. But notice, right? The United States, though faithful to the Truman Doctrine, disregarded UN sanctions for a unifying election across the 38th parallel in Korea. No, the UN sanctioned for the foreseeable future, the 38th parallel to continue to exist as demarcating two separate countries of North and South Korea. So we were on the right side of international law in joining the Korean War, right? The Northern Korean government, communist government under Kim Il-sung, was against international protocol when they invaded that border. However, this does apply. That statement does apply, sadly, to Vietnam. In Vietnam, the 17th parallel, it was supposed to allow a unifying election to unify North and South Vietnam. And we disregarded that call for a unifying election and insisted that South Vietnam stay separate and have no general election to unify it. As you could easily guess, our CIA had reported data that lent to the credence that we would not win that election. But yeah, so number 7 applies to Vietnam, but not Korea.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. So in the Korean War, we finally had a desegregated armed force for the first time. If you want to look up the Incheon invasion, Inchon, it's rather interesting, and it went back and forth. They pushed us all the way down to the southeastern peninsula, and they fought at a famous elementary school and playground. They fought very heroically and held their ground to stay on the peninsula. And then the Marines invaded above at Incheon and began sandwiching the North Korean army. And it turned the tide of the war. And we began pushing them up, but we didn't stop at the 38th parallel. We continued all the way up to the Yalu River, bordering on China. And China had, we still don't know to this day, but perhaps close to 1 million-man army waiting on the Yalu. And they sent some of them across. And they attacked us at the Chosin Reservoir, Chosen. And so if you wanted to look more into the Chosin Reservoir, very, very interesting as far as just military history. And so then they pushed us back beyond the 38th, and we pushed them back up to the 38th, and we ordered a ceasefire. And so it was kind of an armistice. It was just a stalemate, the Korean War. But our objective had been obtained. We kept South Korea free of North Korean communist influence and sovereignty. And then the last one is meant to be all of the above. We fought the Cold War via espionage, diplomacy that was not above, sometimes using blackmail, bribery, and military contingency alliances, by military proxy wars aimed to contain communism's spread, and and then some.
Hey, Derek, so I know we went over 7, but that one's intended to be false. The United States, though faithful to the Truman Doctrine, disregarded the UN sanctions for you.
Yes, because what is stated on number 7 applies to Vietnam rather than Korea.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. So any other questions?
I just want to see if we can go over number 2.
Number 2, in light of Cold War origins, in which manner did the U.S. and Soviet Union not arguably elicit the other's distrust or concern? We failed to share the system of cracking the Axis military codes to a desperate Russian ally. That's true. We did not ship as many supplies to our Russian ally as we did to our British one. That is true. The Soviet Union began imposing its own rule over Central European countries like Poland, liberated from rule. That's true. Our government signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany? No, the Soviet Union did. Yeah. Yeah, the Soviet Union did. All right.
All right, I see you're itching to get out of here, Derek. I'm gonna let you go.
All right. I was trying to hide that. I'm sorry. It's I assure you it's not out of laziness, but I do have several things I need to do.
Okay. Thank you, Derek.
But I don't want to leave you high and dry. So thank you, Laura. If you have any other questions or want to talk about something else, of course I will.
No, I appreciate it, Derek. You're really helpful, man.
All right. I hope so. All right, guys. I have your names down. You'll get your extra credit once again. Thank you for attending. Okay.
Okay. Bye, guys.
I appreciate you guys. I really like this class.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jaden, as always.
Okay. Bye, Derek. Have a good one.
Bye, Laura. You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.